today we're going to talk about a little bit of wiring. So after I redid the front brake lines and cleaned up this area right here, that allowed me to mount the headlight lower. Now what that ended up doing is, because the headlight is not anymore further up, it doesn't push on the cables that are behind there. So the cables were able to hang low and by extension go into these gaps of the steering stoppers. And essentially as you steer, you can see how these things come closer together, eventually touching, right? So that ends up acting like a scissor and potentially cutting my wires. Thankfully, I only ended up slicing through one of the ground wires and nothing more. So then I'm like, okay, I need to fix this. So I started looking at the wires that I have and how I've hooked up things. And I realized that I had made a few mistakes in terms of how things are wired, but also I had a lot of extra cables. So we have the speed sensor here. We have a bunch of cables coming out of the stock odometer, along with a bunch of cables coming out of the speedometer. Then we have the new cable that I put in for the horns, more cables from the old odometer. And then I looked over at the actual wiring for everything else, and my God, is it a mess. So this entire thing here, or this bird's nest of cables, is how the whole front end plugs into the harness. So I figured, you know what? These were made for a bike that had much higher handlebars, a much higher setup for the entire info cluster, and they're really long. And they hang out right in that spot where they get cut. So I figured, you know what, let's shorten these, shorten the ones from the controls, from the Speedo, from the old odometer, and tuck everything nicely so that pretty much most of it is either tucked in under the tank or is away from that scissoring area. So today, first thing we're going to do is actually try to map out all of this. So I don't have any tools with me other than a notepad and a pencil. And I'm just going to go through each plug, record the color of the wires, how they're set up in there, and then correlate that to the user manual and the actual wiring diagram, and then record the wires that I have off of the actual controls and how they're wired. And then we're going to do a diagram and figure out how to plug everything in. And I believe I should be able to figure out some ways to reduce these cables, if not eliminate them completely. Like some of the stuff they used to plug into the old info cluster was all warning lights. I believe this is it. Like these are completely useless. Like I have no use for these cables whatsoever. So might be able to eliminate those entirely. In either case, let's start mapping things out and figure out what in the world is going on here and what's what, and yeah. All right, after about an hour of recording things, I have 2 pages of mapped cables. So let's go diagram them out and figure out what's what. All right, after doing the diagram, I'm going to spare you the boring details of it. You can kind of see it on the left. I decided to start with tucking away the cables for the speedometer. So those are essentially this one big cable right here, which comes in at a nice length right about to here. So we want to keep it nicely tucked all the way back here. So I'm going to rearrange all these onto the appropriate connectors and then see where their equivalent parts are and start connecting them there. So let's do that. All right, after rerouting some of the cables and redoing some of the connections, the Speedo unit is actually connected. Cables are clear from the pinching point down there. The speedometer cable actually comes up and plugs into the Speedo configurator in a much cleaner way, and then the Speedo configurator, I cleaned up the stuff and tucked it under there, under the frame. Rerouted this branch of the harness to this side. So then now the only thing that remains is the headlight plug-in. So I'll see how I'm gonna configure this guy. The one thing that I'm kind of annoyed about is the fact that the headlight unit actually doesn't send out a ground cable, and this one is just plugged into directly like that. So this will have to remain as a bullet connector. And then the remainder of the harness, which is this huge length here, I'm actually going to cut short and use the length of this cable to actually bring everything back to like about here, and plug it in, tuck it away so that nothing is this long. Same on the other side. We have the button cable, which is actually quite long. I can tuck it in there, and then these cables will probably have to be shortened. This is the ignition switch, so I don't believe I'm going to be needing the other two. I think I have to add them flagged to terminate, but we'll see. So I just need to shorten this, probably to right about here where it branches, and just tuck it away nicely with the rest of the stuff. And this should be all cleaned up by then. I hope this should figure out some of the issues I've been having in terms of electrical, like certain features weren't working, certain features were working weirdly. So far, one thing that I did manage to fix is I'm actually getting the check engine light come on when the bike is not on. That's because I've hooked it up to the oil pressure line or sensor. So hopefully when the bike is able to start, we should see that disappear once the bike is running. So that's good. More wire cleanup. I have the right side switches plugged in into this red switch, right, the red connector right here. Again, tucking nicely. None of that extra wiring. As you can see, the harness has been greatly reduced. This is all the stuff I took off of it so far. I still need to figure out the connections to the headlight unit, the plug to the left side switches. I actually took them off because I'm going to be replacing them with the same ones, just less fucked up, so I can take advantage of all the features. And yeah, so progress. So after a little bit more fiddling with the cables, I have finally figured out everything that and how it should be hooked up. So we have the right side switches coming into the red plug here, the left side switches coming into the brown and splitting off to the front, providing a ground for the headlight unit, and that ground actually going all the way down to the headlight. And then from the harness itself, we have one branch splitting up to the red, one branch splitting up to the brown, and one branch splitting up to the horn. So I just need to electrical tape wrap this, and we can essentially tuck that down and in like this. So it'll all get tucked into the under the tank. Now these extra cables here are not needed, so I'm going to terminate them about the length of these ones. Electrical tape wrap them and tuck them down below. So what that means for the front now is that, I mean, the headlight's not fully mounted, but really that's all the cables that are left behind. So it's just the headlight cable, and that is nice and thick, so it doesn't actually drop down into that chopping area. So that will get electrical tape wrapped and moved up. As for this side, that will be the next thing after I package this up nicely. This cable is from the old odometer. I don't think I need any of these. Probably will terminate it down below here just so it tucks in nicely. And then we have these ones, which are, the big one is the ignition key, and the small one again leads to the old odometer. Technically I don't need this, as well as the small one. These used to plug into the so one is for all these buttons and the other one is for the speed sensor, but the speed sensor no longer goes through that part of the harness, so I don't need it. Same with this. I believe this was again for the timer, so I might just terminate these guys. As for the main one, the key ignition one, I do need to shorten this by pretty much to here, or rather to here, so that this plug comes here and then we eliminate this portion. So this will tuck in nicely and will be nice and clean. Furthermore, I did switch out the left side switches for the a new one. This is essentially the exact same one. The reason I switched it out is because I had butchered some of the cables on the old one, and I want to get the flasher to work as well as the clutch cables, so that if the bike stalls I can just pull the clutch in and start it up without having to put it in neutral. So we'll still need to hook that up just to see if it will work. Yeah, as it is right now, I mean, we have everything turns on. We have low beam, high beam, we have blinkers, so front and back and unit. We have those as well, cancels. We have the horn, we have the flasher, and most importantly, the bike turns over. So everything is working. I still need to plug in the tank to get the fuel level up, and I need to move the bike to get the speedometer to work. But that will be all kind of with the final installation. So for now, let's wrap this up so that this is all nice and clean. I do need to drill a hole into the clip-on so that I can mount this so it doesn't rotate. And yeah, let's go from there. Okay, and after wrapping up everything's tucked away. Cables are all insulated. The ignition one is shortened. All the ones that are not needed are terminated. This area is pretty clean now. You can see the two terminated cables from the old odometer, and we have the headlight cable, which is well out of that space. We can actually move the Speedo one to the side as well, and we're pretty clean. I'll need to move this out. So yeah, now the only thing left is to drill the clip-on bar so that I can attach this one properly, hook up the choke again. I do need to grab the button for the clutch lever and hook it up. And I actually tested that with an old button that I had, and it does work. So it does trip the clutch signal so that I can start the bike in gear while the clutch is pulled in. And then just put the tank seat back on and we're good to go. Okay, the left cluster is now mounted with the hole in there so it doesn't rotate. We have all the buttons working. We have the choke working. Okay, so let's get the tank back on, the seat, and we should be wrapping up. Alright, after all that trimming and cleanup of the wires, this is pretty much all the garbage wire that I removed, so a little bit of weight savings, but also a lot less cables. Finished what was probably a third of a roll of electrical tape. So yeah, this is all garbage. I have the tank back on, and now I just got to put the side panels on the seat, set up and mount the headlight properly, because right now it's just kind of hanging there. And I got to put in the button for the clutch lever, and we should be good to go. Alright, bike's finally assembled. Cables are all cleaned up. All we can see now on the side is this cable going to the headlight unit and the Speedo sensor. As for the area right here, it's pretty much completely clean, or much cleaner than it was before. Headlight is on. We have the two new levers with the new brake lines and new clutch line. And as far as electronics go, I have the check engine light on, which is hooked up to oil pressure. So we're expecting that to disappear. The temperature sensor, I have it hooked up to obviously the temperature sensor. It doesn't quite filter with the same ohm resistance as the thing expects, so it kind of comes on a little bit earlier, but that is okay because the way I'm using it is essentially as a indicator on when the bike is warmed up. So I already ran it for a bit, so it's warm. We have the gear indicators, so if we shift, we have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Okay, we have the horn working, headlight, high beam, low beam, flasher works, which is a new feature that I added, or rather a new feature that I had, but I hadn't hooked up properly. We have the, let me put that down, blinkers, front and back, and the other side, as you can see, it works there, works there, works out on the back. In terms of the electrical, the rear brake front works, rear brake back works, so pretty much everything works. The bike does start, so give it some choke. Actually didn't need choke. So the other feature that I added is that I can start the bike if I end up stalling the bike while I'm riding, and let's say I'm in gear. So in first gear, right? Usually the bike doesn't want to start this way, right? But I added the clutch sensor button, so the bike knows when the clutch is engaged. So when I do that, I'm actually able to start it. And there you go. So that's that. That was it for this episode, and actually this will be the last video for this year. I'm going to take a little bit of a break for the holidays, but make sure to subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications. Check me out at Instagram at BalkanMoto2018, and make sure to check out BalkanMoto.com, because in the new year we're going to start taking a look at the rear suspension components, potentially the exhaust, and of course tires. Tires are still a big thing that I need to change on this bike to make it significantly better. But so far, the performance improvements on the front are much better. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.